The great chamber of the resplendent conclave was a place of consecrated silence built to amplify the weight of history. Its walls were woven from solidified light and resonant crystal, each facet containing a fragment of the Valen Imperium's glorious past. A coronation, a treaty signed, a world brought into compliance. For millennia, the chamber had been a vessel for triumph. Now it was a tomb for it. The crystalline structures, which normally pulsed with a gentle internal luminescence keyed to the triumphant harmony of the Imperium's collective will, were now dull and fractured with discordant, sickly hues of violet and gray. The air, usually crisp with the scent of ionized exotic gases, was heavy and stagnant, thick with the unuttered grief and simmering recrimination of the assembled High Lords. At the center of the immense, circular hall, a hololith flickered. It did not display star charts of newly acquired territories or projections of grand fleets poised for conquest. It showed only fire, a roiling, silent, impossible inferno where a star system and the pride of the Valen Armada had once been. It was a wound in the fabric of space, a vortex of incandescent rage that had consumed everything the Imperium had thrown at it, and it was their own fault. Grand Scribe Kalen stood at his designated plinth, his ancient frame cloaked in robes of mourning gray. His multifaceted eyes, usually alight with the wisdom of ages, were fixed on the terrible image. He had seen the birth of stars and the death of civilizations, but he had never witnessed a failure so absolute, so self-inflicted. The silence was a living thing, a predator stalking the spaces between the High Lords. It was finally broken by the grating voice of High Lord Vorlag, his armored carapace twitching with barely suppressed fury. His plinth was that of the War Pact, and the shame of this defeat fell most heavily upon his crest. They lured us in. It was a trap, a weapon of unimaginable power disguised as a stellar anomaly. The primitives were more cunning than our intelligence assessments predicted. His voice was a shard of obsidian, attempting to carve a narrative of enemy treachery from the raw stone of their own hubris. Kalen felt a deep weariness settle into his very bones. It was the same argument Vorlag had been making for cycles, a desperate attempt to salvage honor from a pyre of incompetence. Another voice, softer but laced with the cold precision of the diplomatic corps, rose from the opposite side of the chamber. It was Emissary Lyra. "They warned us," she stated, the words falling like ice chips into the heated atmosphere. "Their communiques were explicit. They designated the entire system a quarantine zone. They broadcasted warnings on every accessible spectrum. They did not use threats. They did not make demands. They pleaded." She paused, letting the word hang in the air, a concept so alien to the Valen lexicon of power that it sounded obscene. Pleaded, as if a lesser species had any right to do anything but submit. Vorlag slammed a gauntleted fist onto his plinth. The crystal beneath it cracked, emitting a pained, chiming sound. Pleas from a species that still uses chemical rockets for orbital insertion. A species that encases their warriors in crude metallic shells and flings solid projectiles across the void. Their pleas were a subterfuge, a novel form of psychological warfare designed to prey on our protocols, to make us hesitate. They knew we would interpret their warnings as a bluff, a pathetic attempt to protect a resource-rich system they had stumbled upon and lacked the power to hold. They counted on our pride. It was their true weapon. Kalen closed his eyes for a moment, the fiery image of the burning system searing itself onto the inside of his eyelids. Vorlag's logic was the very poison that had led them here. The Imperium had encountered countless species in its inexorable expansion across the galactic arm. They were all categorized, assessed, and assimilated according to a rigid calculus of technological and societal development. The humans were an anomaly. They did not fit the models. Their technological progress was wildly uneven. Primitive kinetic weapons existed alongside esoteric energy manipulations their finest scientists were still struggling to comprehend. Their societal structure was a chaotic mess of competing factions, yet they presented a unified front to the galaxy. Their communications were the most baffling of all. Devoid of the usual posturing, the subtle threats, the ritualistic declarations of strength that defined interstellar first contact. The humans were simply direct. Their first message to the Valen scout drone that had breached their declared territory was not a challenge. It was a traffic warning. "Unidentified vessel, you have entered a restricted zone. The star in this system is undergoing a critical, unstable stellar event. For your own safety, please reverse course immediately. There is nothing for you here but destruction." The Valen psychological analysts had dissected that message for weeks. The dominant theory, championed by Vorlag and his ilk, was that it was a masterclass in deception. The calmness was a sign of fear, an attempt to avoid provoking a superior power. The directness was a ploy to appear simple-minded, non-threatening. The claim of a stellar event was a transparent lie to conceal a discovery they could not defend. The Imperium had built its power on the understanding that the universe was a contest of wills, and the stronger will always prevail. The idea of a species acting out of genuine, selfless concern for a potential rival was not just unlikely, it was considered a logical impossibility, a sign of a profound evolutionary defect. The conclave had debated. Kalen remembered the session well. He had argued for caution, not because he believed the humans, but because the anomaly itself was too great to dismiss. A species so paradoxical demanded a more nuanced approach. He had been outvoted. The will of the Star Throne was to expand, to bring all under its benevolent, unyielding shadow. A single, primitive species could not be allowed to halt the march of destiny. So the Armada was sent, not a token force, but a glorious manifestation of Valen might. Battle worlds and fleets of shimmering cruisers, vessels that had shattered moons and brought entire civilizations to their knees. They had translated into the forbidden system with their shields shimmering and their weapon ports open, ready to brush aside the insignificant obstacle. They had expected to meet a meager human fleet, to scatter it with a single volley and claim the system for the glory of the Imperium. They found nothing. The system was empty of ships. There was only the star, bloated and pulsing with an unhealthy light, and the final, chilling message from the humans broadcast on a repeating loop. "It is too late. The cascade has begun. We are sorry." And then the star had unraveled. It was not an explosion in the conventional sense. Space itself had torn open. The light did not travel outwards, it was dragged inwards. The Valen ships, caught in a gravitational tide that defied all known physics, were pulled apart atom by atom. Their shields, which could withstand the heart of a supernova, dissolved into nothing. Their impenetrable hulls were shredded like parchment. The crews had only moments to scream into their comms, their final transmissions a chorus of disbelief and terror that was abruptly silenced as the very fabric of their existence was consumed by the fire. The Imperium was unprepared. They didn't listen. Now they burned, not in the fires of a human weapon, but in the embers of their own arrogance. "Must retaliate," Vorlag snarled, his voice pulling Kalen back to the dreadful present. "We must find their home world and scour it from the star charts. We must avenge the fleets. We must restore the honor of the Imperium." Kalen finally opened his eyes and turned his gaze upon the High Lord of the War Pact. "What honor is there in compounding a catastrophic mistake with an act of blind vengeance?" Kalen's voice was quiet, yet it carried the immense weight of the centuries he had served the Imperium. "You speak as if they attacked us. They did not fire a single weapon. They did not deploy a single ship. The Armada was lost to a phenomenon we did not understand, a phenomenon they warned us of. To attack them now would be the act of a madman lashing out at the scholar who tried to warn him of a cliff's edge." The chamber fell silent again, the weight of Kalen's words pressing down on them all. He was the grand scribe, the keeper of their history. His words were not easily dismissed, even by a warrior as proud as Vorlag. Emissary Lyra's plinth chimed, indicating a desire to speak. "Grand Scribe Kalen is correct. Vengeance would be illogical. It would not return our fleets. It would only confirm to the galaxy that the Valen Imperium is ruled by impulse, not by reason. Our priority now must be understanding. How did they know? How could a species that our probes confirmed has not yet mastered sustained interstellar travel possess astrophysical knowledge that surpasses our own by centuries, perhaps millennia? This is not a question of honor. It is a question of survival. What else do they know that we do not?" Her question resonated in the chamber, a cold, unsettling frequency that touched the core of their fear. The humans were no longer a primitive obstacle. They were a terrifying enigma, a species of unfathomable depth, hidden behind a veil of apparent simplicity. Their power was not in their warships or their weapons, but in their knowledge. And in a universe where knowledge was the ultimate arbiter of power, the Valen Imperium had just discovered it was terrifyingly, hopelessly ignorant. The silence was broken by a new chime, a soft, urgent tone from the central monitoring plinth. A technician, his carapace pale with stress, looked up at the High Lords. "Exalted ones, we are receiving a transmission. It is human." A wave of shock rippled through the conclave. Vorlag's mandibles clicked in a threat display. "On screen, now." The technician fumbled with the controls, his movements clumsy with dread. The fiery image of the destroyed system vanished, replaced by the calm, placid face of a single human. It was a female of the species, her features symmetrical and unadorned. Her hair was dark, pulled back from her face. Her eyes, a deep, unreadable brown, held no malice, no triumph, no anger. They held a profound, unsettling sadness. Behind her was not the bridge of a warship, but a simple, almost monastic chamber, its walls lined with what looked like shelves of physical data scrolls. She was not dressed in a military uniform, but in a simple, dark blue garment. The image was perfectly stable, the signal impossibly clear, broadcast across light years with a fidelity that Valen technology could not hope to match. The human spoke. Her voice was calm, melodic, and translated into perfect, formal Valen by their own systems. "This is Ambassador Eva Rostova of the Terran Alliance. I'm speaking to you from the diplomatic vessel Steward, currently holding position just beyond the orbital path of your outermost planet. I'm unarmed. I'm alone. I'm here to offer condolences for your loss." The sheer audacity of the statement struck the conclave dumb. Condolences, for a loss they had warned them would happen. It was the most profound, most humiliating insult imaginable. Vorlag's rage was a palpable force in the chamber. "This is a mockery, a display of their superiority. They come to our home, to the very heart of the Imperium, to gloat over our failure." But Kalen saw something else in the human's eyes. It was not arrogance. It was not pity in the condescending sense. It was a genuine, weary sorrow. The look of someone who had seen this happen before. The human Ambassador Rostova seemed to wait, as if allowing them a moment to process their shock and anger. She showed no impatience, no fear. The Steward, her vessel, was a speck in their sensor logs, a gnat in the shadow of their home system's defense fleet, yet she held all the power in this exchange. Her very presence, calm and unthreatening, was a testament to a confidence that the Valen had not felt in generations. "Ambassador," Emissary Lyra said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in the chamber. "Your presence is unexpected. What is the purpose of this communication beyond the offering of condolences?" The human offered a small, sad smile. It was a gesture their analysts had tagged as indicating empathy, but seeing it directed at them, at the mighty Valen Imperium, felt like a physical blow. "The purpose, Emissary, is to offer help," Rostova said, "and to ensure that what happened in the Helios 7 system does not happen again. Not to you, not to anyone. The event that consumed your fleet was not an act of war. It was a symptom of a much larger condition. We have been studying these phenomena for some time. We tried to warn you. We are truly sorry that you did not or could not heed our warning." The sincerity in her voice was absolute. It was not the feigned sincerity of a diplomat laying a verbal trap. It was the heavy, immutable truth. And it was this truth that was more terrifying than any weapon. It recontextualized everything. The Valen had not been defied by an upstart race. They had been children who had refused to listen to an elder and had burned themselves on a stove they were told was hot. Kalen felt the foundations of his worldview begin to crumble. The Imperium was built on a singular premise, that they were the apex of galactic evolution, the rightful inheritors of the cosmos. Their philosophy, their art, their science, it was all predicated on this unshakable certainty. And in a single, calm statement, this human, this representative of a chaotic, primitive species, had dismantled it all. She was not speaking to them as a rival, but as a caretaker. It was humbling. It was terrifying, and Kalen knew with a certainty that chilled him to his core that the future of his civilization depended entirely on what they did in the next few moments. Vorlag could shout for war, but war against what? A truth, a law of physics. You could not level a plasma cannon against an equation. "Help!" Kalen spoke the word, his own voice sounding foreign to him. "What help could you possibly offer us?" The human's gaze shifted, her eyes seeming to find his across the light years. "Knowledge," she said simply. "Understanding. A new chart for a sea that is far more dangerous than you believe. We do not want your territory. We do not want your resources. We want you to survive. Because the darkness that is coming will require all of us." The great chamber of the conclave, for the first time in its long history, was filled with a silence born not of reverence or of anger, but of profound and absolute uncertainty. The human ambassador's words echoed in the void, a promise and a prophecy. The Imperium had stared into a fire of its own making, and from the embers a hand had been extended. The question that now hung over all of them, heavier than any crown or title, was whether they possessed the wisdom or the humility to take it. The debate that followed the human's offer was the most fractured and desperate in the Imperium's history. Vorlag and the War-Pact faction saw it as the ultimate humiliation, a trick cloaked in a veil of benevolence. To them, accepting help was tantamount to surrender. They argued that the human vessel should be seized, its ambassador interrogated, their technology reverse-engineered. They believed that strength, and only strength, could restore their position. They saw the human offer of knowledge as an admission of their own military weakness, a desperate gambit from a species that knew it could not win a conventional war. But their arguments, once so compelling, now rang hollow. The image of the burning system was a permanent fixture in the minds of every High Lord. It was a testament to the limits of conventional power. What good were battle worlds against a foe that could predict the very unraveling of spacetime? Emissary Lyra and the diplomatic corps argued for engagement. They saw not a trap, but an opportunity, a chance to turn a catastrophic defeat into a paradigm-shifting alliance. They pointed to the humans' demeanor, their precise language, their impossibly advanced communication technology. These were not the hallmarks of a desperate, primitive race. They were the signs of a civilization so advanced, so confident, that they had moved beyond the petty squabbles of territory and dominance that had defined the Valen for eons. Their logic was cold and inescapable. To refuse the offer was to choose ignorance, and in a changing galaxy, ignorance was a death sentence. It was Kalen, however, who ultimately turned the tide. He did not appeal to strategy or to logic, but to the very soul of his people. He rose from his plinth, his ancient frame seeming to gather a new strength from the gravity of the moment. "For millennia," he began, his voice a low thrum that resonated in the chamber's crystals, "we have defined ourselves by what we have conquered. Our history is a litany of worlds assimilated, of rivals vanquished. We built an empire on the belief that our will was the only will that mattered. We called this strength. Today we see the folly of that belief. The universe has shown us a power that cannot be conquered by force of arms, a truth that cannot be silenced by threats. We have been humbled, and in this moment of humility we are faced with a choice." He paused, his multifaceted eyes sweeping across the faces of the assembled lords, lingering on Vorlag's rigid posture. "We can retreat into the shell of our pride, nurse our wounded honor, and declare war on an enemy who has not attacked us. We can teach our young to hate a species whose only crime was to offer a warning we were too arrogant to hear. We can choose the path of vengeance, and in doing so, we will walk blindly into the darkness the humans spoke of, armed with nothing but the same pride that has already cost us so much." He let the silence stretch, then continued, his voice softening. "Or we can choose a different path. We can acknowledge our error. We can accept that there are forces in this universe greater than our own ambition. We can have the courage to admit that we do not know everything. We can choose to listen. True strength is not the refusal to bend. It is the wisdom to know when to bow. The humans have offered us knowledge. They have offered us understanding. This is not an insult. It is a gift of incalculable value. To accept it is not a sign of weakness. It is the first step toward a new and perhaps truer form of greatness." He returned to his plinth, the effort of the speech leaving him drained. The chamber was still. Vorlag stared at his cracked console, the symbol of his shattered worldview. Finally, the conclave voted. The motion to accept the humans' offer and invite Ambassador Rostova to the capital world passed, not unanimously, but with a clear majority. The age of veil and certainty was over. A new age of questioning had begun. The arrival of the human ambassador was an event of tense, surreal theater. A Valen honor guard, resplendent in their gleaming ceremonial armor, met her shuttle. They were the finest warriors of the Imperium, each a veteran of 100 campaigns, yet they moved with a hesitant uncertainty, their hands never straying far from their weapons. They were prepared for treachery, for an ambush, for anything but what they received. Ambassador Eva Rostova emerged from the shuttle alone. She wore the same simple blue garment, unadorned by medals or insignia of rank. She carried no weapon. She was flanked by no guards. Her demeanor was one of profound calm, a small island of stillness in a sea of Valen anxiety. She walked through the ranks of the towering, armored warriors without a flicker of fear, her gaze meeting theirs with a quiet respect that was more disarming than any show of force. She was brought before the conclave. The chamber was full, but the atmosphere had changed. The anger had receded, replaced by a deep, pervasive curiosity and a palpable apprehension. Rostova stood in the center of the hall where the hololith had once shown their burning fleet. She was a small, fragile-looking creature by Valen standards, yet her presence filled the vast space. Kalen watched her, fascinated. She was the physical embodiment of the paradox that was her species. She appeared vulnerable, yet she radiated an unassailable strength. It was not physical strength, but something deeper, something rooted in conviction and knowledge. "High Lords of the Valen Imperium," she began, her translated voice clear and steady. "I thank you for receiving me. I understand the difficulty of this moment for you. I want to assure you that humanity's intentions are peaceful. We have no desire for conflict. Our only goal is the preservation of sentient life in this galaxy." Vorlag, his pride still raw, could not remain silent. "Preservation? You stood by and watched our armada burn?" Rostova turned her calm gaze upon him. There was no judgment in her eyes, only a profound sense of tragedy. "High Lord Vorlag, we did not stand by. We tried to stand in the way. We sent 38 separate transmissions to your fleet commander, each one containing our full data set on the stellar collapse phenomenon. We begged him to turn back. His only reply was a transmission demanding our unconditional surrender and a warning that our deceptive broadcasts were being logged as evidence of hostile intent. We could do no more. To enter the system ourselves would have meant our own destruction, and it would not have saved your ships. The laws of physics are not subject to negotiation. Her reply was a blade of pure logic, cutting through Vorlag's bluster and leaving him speechless. She had not only warned them, she had tried to educate them, to give them the very knowledge that would have saved them. They had classified it as propaganda. Kalen intervened, his voice calm and authoritative. "Ambassador, you spoke of a larger condition. You said the stellar collapse was a symptom. Please explain. This is the knowledge you offered. We are now prepared to listen." Rostova gave a slight nod, a gesture of acknowledgement. "Very well, Grand Scribe." She raised a small, smooth device from a fold in her garment. A new holographic display bloomed in the center of the room, far clearer and more detailed than the Valen system could produce. It was a map of the galaxy. "For generations, my people believed we were alone," she began, her voice taking on the tone of a historian, a storyteller. "Our expansion into space was slow, fraught with peril. We did not have the benefit of a unified world or a singular purpose. We were, as you have no doubt observed, a chaotic and fractured people. But this chaos fostered a unique form of resilience, a diversity of thought that became our greatest strength." The map zoomed in on a small, unremarkable sector of the galaxy not far from human space. "Centuries ago, we discovered a derelict, not a ship but something far older, a deep space archive drifting in the void between stars. It was not of human origin, it was ancient beyond our ability to date. Its creators were long gone, but they had left behind their knowledge, a library of everything they had ever learned about the universe." A murmur went through the conclave. The concept of such a discovery was staggering. "We called it the Silent Archive. It took us centuries to decrypt even a fraction of its contents. What we learned changed everything we thought we knew about the cosmos. We learned that the universe is cyclical, that it has patterns, seasons, on a scale that dwarfs the lifespans of stars, let alone civilizations. The archive contained data stretching back millions of your years. It chronicled the rise and fall of countless species, empires that dwarfed your own, all long since vanished into dust." The image on the hololith began to shift. It showed complex equations, charts of stellar energy fluctuations, models of cosmic radiation that made Valen physicists gasp. The creators of the archive, whom we call the precursors, had discovered a fundamental principle. That spacetime is not a constant. It has a tensile strength, and that strength can degrade. They discovered that certain types of stellar activity, what you might call hyperdimensional fusion events, act as catalysts for this degradation. The star in Helios 7 was one such catalyst. When it collapsed, it did not merely explode. It tore a temporary hole in the fabric of reality. Your ships were not destroyed by energy or gravity as you understand them. They were unwritten, erased from the universe. The air in the chamber grew cold. This was not science. It was a form of cosmic horror. The idea that existence itself could be so fragile, so easily nullified, was a philosophical shock from which the Valen might never recover. "This," Rostova continued, her voice gentle but firm, "is the reason for our seemingly primitive technology in some areas. Upon learning this, we made a choice. We halted our research into many fields of energy and propulsion that the archive warned could accelerate this decay. We deliberately limited our technological footprint. We embraced kinetics, fusion, technologies that were safe. Our interstellar travel is slow and deliberate because we know the cost of moving too quickly, of tearing at the fabric of the universe with aggressive warp drives or dimensional gateways. We are not a young race stumbling into the stars, High Lords. We are a race that has looked upon the wisdom of the dead, and we have chosen to be careful." This was the great reveal, the stunning, paradigm-shattering truth. Humanity's perceived weakness, their chaotic society, their slow ships, their primitive weapons, was not a weakness at all. It was a choice, a deliberate act of galactic stewardship born of a terrible knowledge. They were not backward, they were humble. They were not weak, they were disciplined. The Valen Imperium, with all its power, all its glory, had been acting like reckless children playing with cosmic fire, and the humans were the weary adults who had been trying to take the matches away. Kalen felt a profound sense of awe, so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. He looked at the human ambassador, and for the first time he truly saw her. He saw the immense burden she and her people carried. The burden of knowing the universe was winding down, that its very foundations were fragile. He understood her sadness now. It was the sadness of Cassandra, cursed to speak true prophecies that no one would believe until it was too late. He looked at Vorlag. The High Lord of the War Pact was slumped in his plinth, his armored carapace seeming to shrink. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a dawning horror. His entire life, his entire philosophy had been predicated on a lie. The strength he had so cherished was, in fact, the most dangerous form of ignorance. The Valen Imperium had been burning long before their fleet ever reached Helios 7. They had been burning with a pride that had blinded them to the truths of the cosmos. What do you want from us?" Lyra asked, her voice barely a whisper. Rostova's gaze softened. "We want you to join us, to become fellow guardians. The archive is not ours to hoard. It is the inheritance of all sentient life. We want to share this knowledge with you so that you can make your own informed choices, so that you can help us monitor the stars, identify other catalyst systems, and warn other species before they make the same mistake you did." She gestured to the galactic map, which now pulsed with dozens of other points of light, each one a star system flagged by the archive as a potential site for a stellar collapse. "The decay is accelerating. The precursors recorded this trend before they vanished. They did not know the cause. We do not know the cause, but we know it is happening. Alone, we are just a single, quiet voice. Together, we might be a chorus that the rest of the galaxy will listen to." It was not a demand for surrender. It was not a treaty of subjugation. It was an invitation to step out of the shadow of their own arrogance and into a larger, more frightening, but ultimately more meaningful existence. It was a chance to transform their greatest failure into their most profound purpose. Kalen knew what the Conclave's decision must be. The Valen Imperium was dead. Its animating spirit, the relentless drive for conquest, had been extinguished in the fires of Helios 7. But from those ashes, something new could be born, an empire of knowledge, a partnership of wisdom. He looked at Rostova, the emissary of this new and terrifying age. Her people had not come to conquer them. They had come to save them from themselves and from a universe far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The choice was simple. They could cling to the embers of their burning empire, or they could reach for the light of a new dawn, however frightening it might be. The period that followed was one of profound and painful transformation for the Valen Imperium. The alliance with humanity was forged not in the triumphant fires of victory, but in the quiet, sterile rooms of data exchange and scientific collaboration. Valen engineers, who had once designed weapons to shatter planets, now worked alongside human astrophysicists to build sensors capable of detecting the subtle precursor waves of spacetime decay. Valen diplomats, who had mastered the art of the veiled threat and the coercive treaty, now learned from the humans the language of open persuasion and shared vulnerability, preparing to approach other galactic powers not as conquerors, but as heralds of a common threat. The process was not easy. There were factions within the Imperium that resisted, clinging to the old ways, whispering of human treachery. But the truth of the silent archive was undeniable. As human and Valen teams jointly translated more of the precursor data, the evidence mounted. The galactic map became a terrifying tapestry of warning lights, each one a potential doom. The burning of the Valen fleet was no longer a unique tragedy, but a grim preview of a galactic future. Kalen found himself at the heart of this new collaboration. He worked closely with Eva Rostova, spending long cycles in the deep space station that now housed a copy of the archive's data. He learned of human history, of their endless cycle of conflict and cooperation, their capacity for both breathtaking cruelty and transcendent compassion. He began to understand how such a chaotic species could produce the discipline and wisdom they now demonstrated. Their history was a crucible that had forged a deep, instinctual understanding of failure. Unlike the Valen, who had known almost unbroken success for millennia, the humans had failed constantly, catastrophically. They had poisoned their own world, fought genocidal wars, and pushed themselves to the brink of extinction countless times. And from each failure they had learned. They had learned humility. They had learned the value of cooperation. They had learned that survival was not a birthright, but a struggle that required constant vigilance and a willingness to change. One cycle, as they were observing a newly translated precursor text, Kalen paused, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the glowing alien script. "Ambassador," he began, the title now a term of genuine respect, "I have been contemplating the precursors. For a civilization so advanced, one that understood the very fabric of the cosmos, to have simply vanished. It is a profound mystery. The archive gives no reason for their disappearance." Eva Rostova turned from the display, her expression somber. "That is the question that has haunted us since we first found the archive, Grand Scribe. They saw the decay. They charted it. They left this library as a warning for those who would come after, but they did not record their own fate. There are fragmented data packets at the very end of their timeline, corrupted and incomplete. But there are no records of a war, no pandemic, no stellar cataclysm in their home territory. They just stopped. The mystery was a disquieting undercurrent to their work, a reminder that even a civilization that could map the flaws in reality was not immune to oblivion. But the immediate threat of the stellar collapses took precedence. The new Human-Valen alliance began its work, reaching out to the other major powers in their galactic quadrant. The initial reactions were predictable. The warrior clans of the Cathar Confederacy dismissed their warnings as a sign of weakness. The silicon-based sentience of the Signian technocracy demanded empirical proof that was, by its nature, impossible to provide without sacrificing a star system. Just as the Valen had, they saw the warnings through the lens of their own cultures. They saw politics, not physics. They saw a play for power, not a plea for preservation. It was a slow, frustrating process, but the alliance did not waver. They had learned the price of pride, and they were determined to prevent others from paying it. The breakthrough, the event that finally shattered the galaxy's skepticism, came unexpectedly. A monitoring station at the edge of Cathar space, a joint Human-Valen project, detected the telltale resonance of a cascade beginning in an uninhabited system deep within the Confederacy's territory. It was a system the Cathar used for fleet exercises. A large portion of their armada was gathering there. The Alliance broadcasted the warning, providing the full data stream, the precursor models, the Valen's own tragic experience. The Cathar High Command, in a display of arrogance that mirrored the Valen's own, laughed it off. They accused the Alliance of trying to disrupt their military maneuvers with a pathetic scare tactic. They ordered their fleets to hold their position. Eva Rostova, Kalen, and the entire Valen conclave watched on a live sensor feed as the Cathar ships held their arrogant formation. They watched as the star at the center of the system began to pulse with a sick violet light, and they watched as it unraveled, consuming the entire Cathar armada in a silent, instantaneous flash of cosmic negation. The galaxy was silent, and then, for the first time, it began to listen. The tragedy of the Cathar became the proof the Alliance needed. One by one, the other powers of the galaxy began to send emissaries, not to negotiate territory, but to ask for knowledge. The age of empire was ending, and an age of fragile, fearful cooperation was dawning. It was during this period of newfound unity, as ships from a dozen different species worked together to install the new precursor-based sensor nets across the galaxy, that the final, most profound twist was revealed. A joint Valen-Human Signian science team, working on the most corrupted data fragments from the end of the Silent Archive, managed to restore a single, coherent data packet. It was not a log file or a scientific observation. It was a message. A final, desperate broadcast from the last of the precursors. Kalen and Rostova were in the central archive chamber when the message was decrypted and played. The hololith flickered to life, not with a map or with text, but with an image. It was a being of pure light, its form indistinct but radiating an aura of immense age and sorrow. A voice, translated by the archive's own systems, filled the chamber. It was not a voice of warning, but of confession. "If any receive this," the voice began, a sound like the chiming of dying stars, "know that we are responsible. The decay, the unraveling of spacetime, it is not a natural phenomenon. It is our fault." A wave of shock passed through Kalen. This was impossible. The decay was a law of nature, a fundamental flaw in the universe. "We were a young race once," the precursor continued, its light form wavering. "Full of ambition, we mastered energy, matter, even the space between dimensions. We sought to become masters of creation itself. We conducted an experiment, an attempt to create a new universe, to birth a cosmos from the energy of our own. We failed. The energy we unleashed did not create. It infected. It introduced a flaw, a subtle corrosion into the very structure of our own reality. The stellar collapses are the symptoms of this infection. Each one is a small victory for the entropic force we unleashed, a cancer spreading through the veins of the cosmos." The revelation was so immense, so reality-shattering, that Kalen felt the floor sway beneath him. The cosmic threat was not a natural cycle. It was an industrial accident, a failed experiment on a scale so vast it was almost incomprehensible. The universe was not dying, it was being murdered. "We tried to reverse it," the precursor's voice continued, laced with an eternity of regret. "But the process is irreversible. We could only slow it. We created this archive as a guide, a map to the symptoms, in the hopes that future generations might be wiser than we were. But we could not remain. Our very existence, our energy signatures, our technology, it resonates with the decay, accelerating it. For the universe to have any chance of survival, for the infection to be slowed to its most natural course, we had to remove ourselves from it. We are not dead. We have gone elsewhere. A self-imposed exile in a dimension outside of this reality from which we can never return. This is our penance. The image of the being of light faded, replaced by one final, chilling image. It was a star chart, but not of their galaxy. It showed a cluster of galaxies, a small portion of the observable universe, and across it, spreading from a single point of origin, the home galaxy of the precursors, was a web of darkness. A visualization of the decay, spreading from galaxy to galaxy like a plague, carried on the invisible currents of intergalactic spacetime. The problem was not galactic. It was universal. The final data packet, Rostova whispered, her face pale, her usual composure gone, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated awe and terror. It's not a warning, it's a challenge, a final, desperate hope from the precursors. On the screen, a final line of text appeared beneath the terrifying map. It was not a plea, it was not a command, it was a question. Can the damage be undone? Kalen looked from the map to Rostova and back again. The burning of his Imperium's fleet, the fall of his civilization's pride, the unification of the galaxy. It was all just the first paragraph in a story so vast it defied imagination. They were not just guardians against a natural decay. They were the inheritors of a failed experiment, the doctors called to the bedside of a dying universe. The humans had not just brought knowledge, they had brought a purpose, a challenge so monumental it would take the combined will of every sentient being that ever was or ever would be to even contemplate. He looked at the map, at the creeping darkness that threatened to consume everything. The fear he felt was immense, a cold, cosmic dread, but beneath it there was something else, a flicker of something he had not felt since he was a young scribe, full of wonder. It was hope. The precursors had failed. The Valen had failed. The humans had failed time and again. But perhaps together all these failures could be forged into a new kind of success. The fire that had burned his people's pride had illuminated a new path. It was a terrifying path, leading into a darkness beyond all comprehension. But for the first time in millennia, the Valen, and perhaps the galaxy itself, were not walking it alone.